My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and until a freezing Tuesday in a Manhattan delivery room, I let my toxic husband believe I was just a struggling freelance data analyst. 3 hours after pushing my body to the absolute breaking point to bring our daughter into the world, I looked up at him expecting to see tears of joy. Instead, he stepped back from the hospital bassinet with a look of utter disgust. He leaned down his expensive cologne, mixing with the sterile air, and whispered that he already had a son, a real heir, with another woman. He refused to even look at our little girl. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just smiled, looked him dead in the eye, and told him to remember this exact second. What he did not realize was that by the next morning, I would completely dismantle his entire universe. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to find out exactly how I turned my ultimate heartbreak into the most spectacular revenge. The epidural had not begun to wear off. My legs felt like lead blocks, and the exhaustion of a grueling labor still pulled at every muscle. The medical monitors next to my bed beeped in a steady rhythm. Our newborn daughter, swaddled tightly in a pink blanket, slept peacefully in the clear plastic bassinet beside me. Donovan, my husband of 7 years, stood near the window with his arms crossed tightly. He was a 35-year-old senior investment banker, a man whose entire identity revolved around luxury watches, power lunches, and maintaining his flawless image as the undisputed king of our social circle. He had not touched her. He had not even asked the delivery nurse her weight. Instead, Donovan pulled a sleek silver pen from his tailored suit jacket. He grabbed the official birth certificate paperwork from the tray table and tossed it directly onto my lap. The sharp edges of the paper scraped against my hospital gown. "Sign it yourself," he said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "I am not putting my name on that document." I stared at him, the blanket suddenly feeling like a suffocating weight. "What are you talking about?" "She is your daughter." Donovan adjusted his custom cufflinks, refusing to cast a glance down at the sleeping infant. "She is your daughter, Clara. I already have an heir, a son. He is a year old, and his mother actually knows how to carry herself in my demanding world." The cruel words hit the quiet air like physical blows. A 1-year-old son. While I was taking painful hormone injections and crying myself to sleep every night, my husband was actively building a secret family across town. "Sydney is a real partner," Donovan sneered casually, dropping the name of his 27-year-old junior analyst. "She networks effortlessly with the board of directors. She does not sit around the house all day being entirely useless. You have spent the last 5 years typing spreadsheets in your pajamas, making absolute pennies. You are a glorified bookkeeper, Clara. My family was right about you from the very start. You dropped out of law school to find yourself, and you ended up being nothing." He stepped closer to the bed, leaning over me with a predatory smirk on his handsome face. His broad shadow fell across the bassinet, casting our beautiful newborn daughter in darkness. "My lawyer will drop off the divorce papers tomorrow morning." He continued, his tone utterly conversational, as if he were discussing a profitable stock portfolio rather than destroying our marriage. "Sign them without making a pathetic scene, and I will not leave you completely homeless. I will give you 50 grand to go rent a modest place in Queens. Fight me, and I will freeze our joint accounts and bury you in legal fees until you are begging on the street. Do you understand me?" A normal woman might have broken down right then. A normal woman might have begged him to reconsider, screaming and crying about the sacred vows they took. But I was not the woman Donovan thought I was. I never had been. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained complete, unwavering eye contact with the man who had just discarded me like yesterday trash. The corners of my mouth curled upward into a chilling smile. "Then remember this moment, Donovan," I whispered softly. He scoffed aloud, shaking his head at my apparent lack of hysterics. "You always were delusional, Clara." As he turned his back to admire his reflection in the room-dark television screen, I slowly slid my right hand under my thin hospital pillow. My fingers found the smooth glass of my secondary smartphone. It was a highly secure encrypted device, that neither Donovan nor my toxic parents knew existed. I unlocked the bright screen, opened my secure messaging application, and typed 3 words to my chief operating officer. Initiate Protocol Black. Donovan checked his expensive watch, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just triggered the financial execution of his entire career. I have a dinner reservation with Sydney, he announced, smoothing his lapels one last time. Have the nurse pack up your things tomorrow. I want you out of my house by the weekend. He walked out of the room. Moments later, a young hospital nurse walked hesitantly inside. She looked thoroughly confused, her eyes darting from the open door to me. In her arms, she held a massive bouquet of jet-black roses. "Delivered for you," she murmured. I pulled the thick card from inside the dark blooms. It contained a single word: checkmate. I looked down at my beautiful sleeping daughter, tracing the delicate outline of her tiny hand with my index finger. She was absolutely and completely perfect. Morning sunlight had barely breached the hospital blinds when the heavy wooden door to my recovery room flew open, striking the wall with a loud thud. I did not flinch. I simply adjusted my daughter's blanket as my entire family marched inside. My mother, Helen, led the charge, her designer heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. Behind her followed my father Thomas, my younger sister Rachel, and her husband Isaiah. I scanned their empty hands. They brought no flowers, no balloons, not a single stuffed animal for their newborn granddaughter. They did not even glance at the bassinet where my child was sleeping. Instead, Helen marched straight to the side of my bed and slammed a thick manila folder onto my lap, missing my baby by mere inches. "Sign it," Helen demanded, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere coat. Donovan had his corporate lawyers draft it up overnight. It is a post-nuptial surrender. You waive all claims to his assets, his investments, and the house. I stared at the heavy legal document resting heavily on my legs, then looked up at my mother. "You are ambushing me with divorce papers less than 24 hours after I gave birth to your granddaughter. Do not play the victim with me, Clara." Helen snapped, her voice dripping with absolute venom. Donovan is a high earner. He has a pristine reputation to uphold in the financial sector. You cannot drag him down with a messy public divorce just because you are bitter he found a real woman. You embarrassed this family enough when you dropped out of law school to find yourself. We watched you waste years typing up freelance spreadsheets in your pajamas while Rachel actually made something of her life. Donovan is the best thing that ever happened to you, and you ruined it. My father Thomas stepped forward, his expression hard and unforgiving. "Your mother is exactly right. You have always been the family charity case, Clara. Donovan is offering you a clean break. Be smart for once in your life and take it. Do not bite the hand that feeds us all." Rachel leaned against the windowsill, casually inspecting her freshly manicured nails. "Honestly, Clara, what did you expect?" Rachel sighed, rolling her eyes in disgust. "You let yourself go completely. You wear cheap clothes, you never attend the charity galas, and you wonder why Donovan found someone else. Sydney is at least on his level. Just sign the papers so we can all move on from this embarrassment." I shifted my gaze to Isaiah. My brother-in-law stood near the door, adjusting his expensive gold Rolex and looking at me with pure disdain. He was a ruthless real estate developer who built his entire career by riding Donovan's coattails. "Let me break this down for you in simple terms, so you understand," Clara, Isaiah said, stepping closer to the foot of my hospital bed. "Donovan is the primary financial backer for my new luxury condo project downtown. We break ground next week. If you try to fight this divorce, his assets will get frozen in a prolonged legal battle. You are not going to be selfish and jeopardize my massive development just because your feelings are hurt. Take the 50 grand he is generously offering, pack up your things, and go back to a cheap rental where you belong. Do not ruin this family and our financial stability." The sheer audacity of their demands hung heavily in the sterile hospital air. My own parents and sister were actively conspiring with my cheating husband to leave me destitute solely to protect their own financial interests and social standing. They viewed me as nothing more than a minor inconvenience standing between them and Donovan's bank accounts. They truly believed I was a helpless, penniless freelance worker who had no choice but to submit to their cruel demands. I looked at the manila folder. I did not argue. I did not plead my case or demand loyalty from the people who shared my blood. I simply reached over to my bedside table, picked up a black pen, and flipped open the heavy folder. Helen blinked, clearly shocked by my utter lack of resistance. She had braced herself for a screaming match. Instead, the only sound in the room was the scratching of my pen against the thick paper. I signed my name on the dotted line of the property waiver. I signed away my rights to the suburban house. I signed away my claim to his retirement accounts and his massive investment portfolios. I initialed every single page with smooth, calculated precision. When I finished the final page, I closed the folder and handed it back to Helen. Rachel let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the small room. "I cannot believe you folded that easily," she sneered, shaking her head. "You really are pathetic, Clara. You do not even have the spine to fight for yourself." I ignored my sister completely. I kept my eyes locked solely on Isaiah. His arrogant smirk slowly faded as he noticed the absolute chilling calm in my expression. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as I leaned forward against my pillows, keeping my gaze fixed on him. "I hope your luxury condo project has excellent insurance, Isaiah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Isaiah frowned, his brows knitting together in sudden confusion. What is that supposed to mean? Before he could finish his arrogant sentence, the loud, obnoxious ringtone of his smartphone shattered the silence in the hospital room. He pulled the phone from his tailored pocket, his annoyance visible as he read the caller identification. It was his lead site manager. Isaiah answered the call, his tone aggressive and impatient. "I told you not to bother me this morning. We do not break ground until next week." I watched his face closely as he listened to the frantic, panicked voice screaming on the other end of the line. The blood completely drained from Isaiah's cheeks, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His hand began to tremble violently, causing the expensive phone to shake against his ear. The arrogant real estate developer who had just ordered me to go live in a cheap rental now looked like a man who had just watched his entire world go up in flames. "What do you mean the permits are revoked?" Isaiah choked out his voice, cracking in sheer panic. "What do you mean we no longer have access to the foundational land?" I leaned back against my hospital pillows, gently stroking my sleeping daughter's soft cheek. The dominoes were finally starting to fall. 2 hours later, I stood in the sterile hospital lobby with the weight of my newborn daughter strapped to my chest in a fabric carrier. My hospital bag slung over my shoulder felt heavy, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating presence of Donovan leaning against the sliding glass exit doors. He had stayed behind just to ensure I actually left the premises. He checked his phone and a scowl pulled at his perfectly groomed features. He was annoyed that my departure was cutting into his busy schedule. He did not ask how I felt physically. He did not offer to carry my heavy bag. "Clara, you are moving too slow," Donovan snapped while pocketing his device. "Sydney is waiting for me at the restaurant, and I do not want the press getting photos of me standing next to a woman looking like a vagrant." I adjusted the straps of the baby carrier and kept my expression entirely neutral. I walked past him toward the automatic doors without saying a word. As the doors slid open, a gust of freezing wind hit my face. A battered gray sedan pulled up to the curb, and the Uber sticker was barely clinging to its cracked windshield. Donovan scoffed aloud at the sight of the vehicle. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He tossed it onto the wet pavement directly at my feet. "Keep the change, Clara, and buy the kids some generic formula," he said. "It is the last handout you are ever getting from me." I looked down at the money fluttering in the dirty puddle. I did not stoop to pick it up. I stepped right over it, and the rubber sole of my sneaker pressed his arrogant insult directly into the mud. I opened the creaking door of the sedan and slid into the back seat to shield my daughter from the cold wind. Donovan glared at me through the window, and his jaw clenched in fury at my silent defiance. He wanted a dramatic reaction. He wanted me to beg and cry. I simply reached out and pulled the door shut to cut him off completely. The driver was an older man with tired eyes, and he glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "We are heading to the address on Elm Street, miss," he asked. He was referring to the cramped and rundown apartment I had rented under a fake name specifically to maintain my cover story. Yes, I said initially as I settled back into the worn upholstery. The car merged into the heavy Manhattan traffic. Rain began to streak across the window and blurred the glowing city lights. I looked down at my daughter. She was so small and so entirely dependent on me. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Holding her securely, my mind pulled me back to the last Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' sprawling suburban estate. I remembered sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table, wearing a simple cardigan while Rachel flaunted a diamond necklace Donovan had helped her husband finance. My father Thomas had raised his crystal wine glass and silenced the entire room. "We have so much to be thankful for this year," Thomas had boomed. "Rachel and Isaiah are expanding their real estate portfolio. Donovan is crushing it at the investment bank. And then we have Clara." The entire table had chuckled cruelly. Thomas had looked down his nose at me. "Clara is our little family charity case," Thomas had said. "Still playing around with those freelance spreadsheets, sweetheart. You know, if you had not dropped out of law school, you might actually be able to afford a decent haircut. Donovan is an absolute saint for putting a roof over your head." I remembered the exact way Donovan had smirked while soaking in the praise. My mother Helen had nodded in enthusiastic agreement. They had spent years conditioning me to believe I was worthless, and they fed off my supposed failure to elevate their own fragile egos. They needed me to be the scapegoat, so their golden lives looked brighter and more successful by comparison. I opened my eyes and the bitter memory faded into the steady hum of the car engine. The weak woman they thought they knew died the moment Donovan threw those divorce papers onto my hospital bed. "Excuse me," I called out to the driver and my voice was suddenly sharp and commanding. "Change the destination right now. We are not going to Elm Street." The driver blinked in the mirror in surprise. "Where to, miss?" "Take me to the financial district," I instructed smoothly. "Number 1 Apex Tower." The driver raised a skeptical eyebrow, but tapped the new coordinates into his navigation system. The battered sedan changed lanes and moved away from the bleak outskirts. We sped directly toward the beating heart of the city economy. The rain cleared as we entered the district, revealing towering monoliths of glass and steel that touched the dark sky. We pulled up to a private and hyper-luxury skyscraper that completely dominated the city skyline. The building was a fortress of black glass, and it was entirely unapproachable to the general public. There were no flashing neon signs or welcoming entryways. There was just a subtle and matte titanium letter A, etched deeply into the stone pillars by the grand entrance. The Uber driver whistled softly under his breath. "I cannot stop here long, miss," he warned me. "The private security at this building does not mess around with regular cars like mine." "You will not have to wait," I replied, while unbuckling my seatbelt. Before I could even reach out for the door handle, a team of men in sharp black suits rushed out from the gleaming marble lobby. The head concierge was a tall man with a severe and disciplined expression. He stepped right up to the battered sedan. The Uber driver shrank back in his seat and clearly expected to be yelled at and ordered to move along. Instead, the concierge gripped the door handle and pulled it open with practiced reverence. He did not look at my cheap clothes. He did not look at the rusty condition of the car. He bowed deeply and kept his eyes fixed firmly on the pavement, in a show of ultimate respect. "Welcome back, Madam CEO," the concierge said, and his clear voice carried easily over the bustling city noise. "The executive board is waiting in the penthouse. They are completely ready for your hostile takeover presentation." I stepped out of the cheap car, and the cool city air rushed over me. I cradled my daughter against my chest and felt the absolute power of the moment surge through my veins. The illusion was finally over. Every single person who had delighted in tearing me down was about to learn exactly who they had been mocking. My era of silent submission was finished. 30 miles away from the gleaming glass towers of the financial district, Donovan stood in the center of our sprawling suburban living room. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, swirling the amber liquid as he admired the sweeping changes happening around him. Sydney, his junior analyst and apparent mother of his true heir, was already treating the space like her personal kingdom. She strutted across the imported hardwood floors in her designer heels, pointing a manicured finger at my carefully curated furniture. "Tear those hideous curtains down," Sydney ordered a pair of hired decorators. "And that rug has to go immediately. It completely clashes with the modern aesthetic I am bringing to this space." Clara had terrible taste. Everything she bought looks like it belongs in a cheap catalog. Donovan chuckled, taking a slow sip of his drink. He leaned against the marble fireplace mantel, looking thoroughly pleased with his upgraded life. "Do whatever you want with the place, babe," Donovan said smoothly. "The house is completely yours now." Clara is probably crying in some roach-infested motel by now. She signed the post-nuptial agreement this morning without a single fight. She completely surrendered her marital rights. I told you she was weak. She barely even squeaked when I handed her the pen. Sydney wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "You are brilliant, Donovan. Now we can finally raise our son in a home that reflects our actual status." Their shared moment of victory was violently interrupted. The heavy mahogany front door did not just open, it was thrown wide with a resounding crack that shook the entryway walls. Donovan spilled his scotch down the front of his tailored shirt as 6 men in immaculate black suits marched into the foyer. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. Behind them, a crew of professional movers wearing uniform gray polos poured into the house, carrying thick rolls of packing tape and heavy-duty storage boxes. "What the hell is this?" Donovan bellowed, his face turning an angry shade of red. He slammed his glass onto the mantel and marched toward the intruders. "Who let you inside my house? Get out before I call the police and have you all arrested for breaking and entering." The men in black suits did not flinch. They fanned out, securing the perimeter of the living room, while the movers immediately began grabbing Sydney's newly ordered decor items and tossing them into boxes. Sydney shrieked, lunging forward to grab a custom vase from a mover's hands. "Hey, put that down!" Sydney screamed. "Those are imported!" The head of the security detail stepped forward. He was a broad-shouldered man with a military posture and cold, dead eyes. He ignored Sydney completely and focused his unwavering gaze directly on Donovan. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy metal clip. Donovan puffed out his chest, trying to leverage his intimidation tactics. "I am an investment banker at a premier firm. I own this house. I pay the mortgage on this property. You have exactly 10 seconds to vacate my premises before I destroy you and whatever bottom feeder security company you work for." The security chief did not blink. He simply extended his hand and pressed the heavy stack of papers firmly against Donovan's chest. "You do not own anything, sir," the security chief stated, his voice a flat, mechanical drone. "You missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments over the last 90 days because you illegally diverted funds to shell accounts in the Cayman Islands." Donovan froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His mouth hung open slightly as the reality of his own financial negligence caught up with him. He had been so focused on hiding his assets from me before the divorce that he completely ignored the automated warnings from his own mortgage lender. "The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings last week," the security chief continued without an ounce of pity. "The entirety of your debt was purchased this morning by Apex Holdings. They are the new legal owners of this property. They have executed an immediate eviction order. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises." Sydney spun around, her eyes wide with panic. "Donovan, what is he talking about? You said this house was fully paid for. You said Clara got nothing." "Shut up!" Sydney. Donovan hissed, his hands trembling as he flipped through the legal documents. His eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, searching desperately for a loophole, a mistake, anything he could use to fight back. But the paperwork was ironclad. The official seal of the state court glared back at him. Apex Holdings had outmaneuvered him flawlessly. "This is a mistake," Donovan stammered, backing away from the security chief. "It is a minor liquidity issue. I have millions in assets. I can cover the outstanding balance right now. Just give me 5 minutes to make a phone call." The security chief crossed his arms. "The clock is ticking, sir. 55 minutes remaining. Any property left inside the house after the deadline will be seized and incinerated. Donovan scrambled to pull his smartphone from his pocket. He was sweating profusely now. The cool, arrogant king of the suburbs had vanished, replaced by a desperate man watching his empire crumble. He dialed the direct line to his private wealth manager at the bank. He paced frantically across the living room while the movers systematically dismantled the life he thought he had secured. Pick up, Donovan muttered, pressing the phone hard against his ear. The line clicked open. Donovan. This is not a good time, his wealth manager said, his voice laced with absolute panic. Listen to me, Donovan ordered. I need an immediate bridge loan. I cannot do that, the manager replied. All your credit lines have been frozen by an anonymous directive. Isaiah paced the muddy perimeter of the downtown construction site. His custom Italian leather shoes sank deep into the wet gravel. The skeletal steel framework of his luxury condo project loomed above him. It was a massive monument to his towering ambition that was rapidly turning into a permanent tombstone for his entire career. The site was completely silent. The heavy machinery sat entirely idle. The angry union workers had walked off the job exactly an hour ago when their payroll checks bounced. Isaiah clutched his modern smartphone tightly to his ear. He was desperately trying to pacify the furious investors who were screaming at him on the active conference call. The $50 million in vital backing that Donovan had personally promised him had suddenly vanished into thin air. The transfer was supposed to clear at exactly 9 this morning. Instead, the bank informed him that Donovan's accounts were completely frozen and the wire was canceled. I assure you the capital is highly secure, Isaiah lied smoothly. He wiped a thick bead of cold sweat from his forehead. There is just a very minor administrative holdup with the corporate accounts. We will resume construction early tomorrow morning. Do not pull your investments out now. I have absolutely everything under my complete control. He ended the call before they could demand any concrete proof. His chest heaved with panicked breaths. He needed cold, hard cash immediately. If word got out that his primary financial backer was entirely insolvent, his entire development firm would face total bankruptcy by Friday afternoon. With trembling fingers, he quickly scrolled through his long contact list and directly dialed his father-in-law, Thomas. Thomas answered on the second ring. Isaiah, I am in the middle of a very important board meeting. Make it quick. Thomas, I have a massive problem. Isaiah stammered loudly. He paced frantically past a tall stack of rusted steel beams. Donovan's private funding completely evaporated. The bank froze all his assets. My workers just walked off the site and the investors are threatening a massive lawsuit. I need you to wire me $5 million from your private accounts right now to cover the gap. Thomas let out a sharp sigh of extreme irritation. I cannot just liquidate $5 million on a Tuesday morning, Isaiah. What exactly happened with Donovan? He is the most secure investment banker in the city. It has to be Clara. Isaiah spat. His voice was dripping with pure venom and misplaced blame. She must have provoked him during the divorce settlement. She is always ruining things for everyone else. She is completely selfish. That girl is a relentless liability. Thomas agreed. His tone hardened with absolute disgust. She has been an embarrassment to this family for years. She does it on purpose, Isaiah ranted, kicking a loose rock into the thick mud, just like she did at my wedding. Rachel spent an absolute fortune to make our special day perfect. Clara showed up wearing that pathetic cheap polyester dress she bought off a discount rack. She looked like a poor peasant standing next to the beautiful bridesmaids. She practically ruined the wedding photos just to spite us. Now she is throwing a tantrum and jeopardizing my entire downtown development. Calm down, Thomas ordered coldly. I will call my personal broker and see if I can leverage a short-term loan against the family estate. Do not let the major investors panic. We will fix whatever mess Clara caused. Isaiah hung up the phone and let out a shaky breath of relief. Thomas was wealthy, but securing a $5 million bridge loan would take days. Isaiah needed a true miracle to keep the site operational until then. A sleek black town car suddenly turned off the main avenue and glided onto the dirt lot. The heavy tires crunched loudly over the gravel. They splashed a thick wave of dirty, muddy water directly onto Isaiah's expensive trousers. He cursed loudly, stepping back quickly as the vehicle came to a smooth halt right in front of him. The darkly tinted windows obscured the mysterious passengers inside. Isaiah marched right up to the passenger door. His face was red with righteous fury. "Hey, you cannot park your car here. This is a restricted private development site. Get your vehicle off my property before I have it legally impounded." The rear door clicked open. A tall, impeccably dressed executive stepped out into the thick mud. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. He did not look intimidated by Isaiah's aggressive posturing. In fact, he looked entirely bored. "Isaiah Vance," the executive stated. His tone was completely devoid of any real emotion. "Who is asking?" Isaiah demanded loudly. He crossed his arms and puffed out his chest. "I am the lead developer and owner of this site. My name is Marcus," the executive replied smoothly. "I am the chief legal counsel for Apex Holdings, and you are no longer the developer of anything." Isaiah barked out a harsh, arrogant laugh. "You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. I own the developmental rights to this entire city block." Marcus calmly snapped open his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick legal injunction stamped with the bright red seal of the state Supreme Court. He slapped the document firmly against the chest of Isaiah. "Your municipal permits were revoked 20 minutes ago," Marcus said. "You purchased the developmental rights, Mr. Vance, but you failed to secure the foundational land rights. You built your entire luxury project on leased dirt." "The previous holding company was bought out this morning," Marcus corrected. "The new ownership of the foundational land has decided to terminate your lease effective immediately due to breach of financial covenants. You have zero funding." Isaiah felt the world spinning around him. He stared at the bottom of the injunction, searching for the name of the ruthless owner. The bold signature read, "Clara." 2 days after I completely dismantled Isaiah and Donovan, my mother managed to track my location. She had spent the last 48 agonizing hours desperately calling every single cheap motel, hostel, and low-rent apartment complex in the greater metropolitan area, completely convinced that her eldest daughter was currently living in absolute abject squalor. My secure phone buzzed with an alert from the lobby security desk at the Grand Azur, the 5-star hotel where I permanently owned the top 3 penthouse floors. Helen had bullied the concierge into letting her into the private VIP residence lounge. I sat on a custom velvet sofa, gently rocking my sleeping daughter, and watched my mother march through the ornate gold double doors. Helen looked entirely frantic. Her usually flawless hair was slightly frizzy and her designer coat was buttoned crookedly. She stormed across the imported Italian marble floor with tunnel vision. She was so completely blinded by her own rage that she failed to notice the cascading crystal chandeliers, the priceless modern art adorning the walls, or the fact that a private butler was currently pouring my sparkling water. In her mind, she had tracked her failure of a daughter down to a cheap temporary motel. She literally could not compute the wealth surrounding me. "Clara, what on earth is wrong with you?" Helen hissed, stopping inches from the velvet sofa. She did not glance at her newborn granddaughter. "Do you have any idea the absolute chaos you have caused?" I took a slow sip of my water. "I caused chaos." "Do not play coy with me!" Helen snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "Donovan is completely ruined. He was evicted from the house, his accounts are frozen, and the bank is investigating him for offshore fraud. And poor Isaiah. His entire downtown development project was shut down because some predatory holding company bought the land out from under him. The investors are suing him for breach of contract. The family is in an absolute crisis, and you are sitting here hiding out in this cheap little lobby." I smiled gently. "I am glad Donovan and Isaiah are facing the consequences of their actions." Helen gasped, clutching her leather handbag tightly to her chest. "How can you be so vindictive? Donovan gave you a wonderful life, And you drove him away by being utterly useless. Now your father and I are suffering because of your petty tantrums. Thomas relied on Donovan's bank to approve the corporate expansion loans for his manufacturing firm. Without Donovan, your father's business is going to stall, and Rachel is absolutely devastated. She relies on Isaiah's real estate income for her monthly allowance. You are destroying your sister's livelihood. Helen dug her manicured hand into her designer purse and pulled out a personal checkbook. She aggressively scribbled a number, ripped the slip of paper free, and slapped it down onto the polished glass coffee table directly in front of me. "There is $5,000, Helen demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the paper. "Take this money, go buy yourself some decent clothes, and go find Donovan. Apologize to him. Beg him to take you back as a mistress if you have to. I do not care if he lives with that junior analyst. You will do whatever it takes to fix this mess and get his accounts unfrozen. You owe this family, Clara. Rachel needs her monthly allowance and your father's business relies heavily on Donovan's bank." I stared at the check resting on the glass table. $5,000. It was an insulting, pathetic sum designed to keep me compliant and dependent. For 33 years, Helen had manipulated me with this exact brand of emotional warfare. She had spent my entire life protecting Rachel and Thomas at my expense. When Rachel wrecked a car in high school, Helen blamed me for distracting her. When Thomas made bad investments, Helen told me I needed to drop out of college to save the family money. I was always the scapegoat, the sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered on the altar of their public image. They had conditioned me to believe that my only purpose was to serve their needs. Every dream I had ever possessed was ruthlessly crushed, to ensure Rachel could shine brighter. Every single accomplishment I earned was deliberately minimized so Thomas could feel like the smartest man in the room. They wanted me to be weak. They desperately needed me to be weak. "You truly believe I am the villain here?" I asked quietly. "You watched Donovan hand me divorce papers hours after I gave birth. You helped him try to leave me with absolutely nothing. And now you expect me to grovel to a man who discarded your own granddaughter." Helen rolled her eyes, completely devoid of maternal warmth. "Do not use the baby to guilt-trip me, Clara. You knew what you were getting into when you married a high-value man. You failed to keep his interest. That is your fault. Now take the check and go fix your mistakes before you ruin us all." I did not touch the paper. The blatant disrespect no longer held any power over me. The woman standing before me was not a mother. She was a greedy parasite who had spent her entire adult life feeding off my forced submission. I finally saw her for exactly what she was. A desperate, terrified woman clinging to a house of cards that was rapidly collapsing around her perfectly manicured fingers. I simply leaned forward and used my index finger to slowly slide the check back across the smooth glass until it rested directly in front of her. Helen did not fight back. She did not scream or demand respect. She stood up on shaky legs, her designer coat hanging limply from her shoulders, and allowed the butler to guide her out of the penthouse. The heavy gold doors clicked shut, plunging the massive living room back into peaceful silence. I looked down at my daughter, tracing the soft curve of her cheek as she slept peacefully against my chest. The toxic rot of my past was finally being excised piece by piece. My quiet victory was momentarily interrupted by the sharp, persistent buzzing of my secondary smartphone. It was an unregistered number. Only a handful of elite corporate fixers and high-level executives possessed this direct line. I carefully picked up the device, silencing the ringer, to protect my sleeping child, and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello," I answered, my tone strictly professional. "Well, you certainly do not sound like a woman who is currently living in a roach-infested motel." A shrill, arrogant voice echoed through the speaker. It was Sydney, the junior analyst and overly confident mistress. I leaned back against the plush velvet cushions, genuinely amused by her sheer audacity. "How did you acquire this number, Sydney?" I asked. "I paid a premium private investigator to track your digital footprint." Sydney bragged, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "Donovan said you would probably change your number and hide under a rock after the divorce. I am calling because we need to get a few legal housekeeping items sorted out immediately. I need you to contact the courthouse and officially drop his last name today. I am taking his name next week, and I absolutely refuse to share a surname with a woman who wears cheap sweaters and buys generic groceries. I want to be the new and improved wife, without any ties to your pathetic bargain bin legacy. I listened to her delusional demands, marveling at how completely Donovan had managed to brainwash her. Despite being evicted from a suburban mansion by a hostile corporate takeover squad just 48 hours ago, Sydney still firmly believed she had won the ultimate prize. She still thought Donovan was a titan of the financial sector experiencing a temporary setback. "You spent money on a private investigator just to demand I change my last name," I asked, allowing a hint of mild amusement to color my words. "Do not act like you are above this." Clara Sydney scoffed loudly, her arrogance masking her underlying insecurity. "Donovan told me exactly what happened in the delivery room. He told me you cried when you saw my son. Face it, you are completely dried up and useless. You could not give him a proper heir, and you definitely could not keep up with his demanding high-value lifestyle. He only kept you around for the last 5 years because you did his personal taxes for free. You were nothing but a glorified bookkeeper who got lucky enough to wear his ring. Now, sign the paperwork, drop the name, and accept that you lost to a much younger, much smarter woman." I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults or defend my pride. I simply allowed a soft, chilling laugh to escape my lips. "I did his taxes, yes," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm register. "Which means I know exactly which Cayman Island accounts he used to hide his embezzled client funds. I know the exact routing numbers for the shell corporations he set up under your name to bypass federal taxation laws." She was suddenly panicking. "You are lying!" Sydney stammered, her shrill voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming fear. "Donovan is a senior partner. He is incredibly wealthy. Check Channel 4 News." "Sydney," I whispered coldly. "They are running a live broadcast from the lobby of his investment bank right now. Federal government agents are currently seizing his physical assets and executing a massive corporate raid. Enjoy your new last name. I am sure it will look absolutely fantastic on a federal indictment. You have been thoroughly played, Sydney." Donovan stood frozen inside the soundproof glass walls of the executive boardroom on the 50th floor of the city's most prestigious investment bank. The panoramic view of the skyline usually filled him with a sense of untouchable supremacy. Today, it felt like a transparent cage. Below him, the trading floor was devolving into a state of absolute, unprecedented anarchy. Men and women in tailored suits were sprinting between desks, frantically shredding documents and smashing hard drives. Men in dark windbreakers with federal agency acronyms printed boldly across their backs were systematically marching through the security turnstiles. They carried thick plastic bins and heavy-duty zip ties, seizing computers and sealing file cabinets with terrifying efficiency. The flashing red and blue lights from the fleet of government vehicles parked tightly on the street below cast an eerie, pulsating glow against the expensive mahogany furniture inside the room. The sheer scale of the disaster was impossible to comprehend. Donovan loosened his silk tie, his hands shaking so violently he could barely undo the knot. He turned his attention back to the massive television mounted on the far wall. Every single major news network was running the exact same breaking story. The chyron scrolling rapidly across the bottom of the screen read, "Massive offshore tax evasion syndicate uncovered." The lead anchor, a woman with a severe expression and a crisp voice, was breaking down the highly classified details of the leak. She displayed a complex graphic on the screen, drawing a direct, undeniable line from prominent local politicians and wealthy elite clients right back to Donovan's specific investment portfolio. The broadcast displayed redacted but highly detailed banking ledgers, routing numbers, and shell company registrations. It was a flawless paper trail of extreme corporate fraud. The anchor explicitly detailed how funds had been illegally diverted through a labyrinth of Cayman Island accounts to avoid federal taxation and obscure the origins of the money. Donovan felt the blood drain entirely from his face. Those were his private accounts. Those were the highly encrypted files he had meticulously hidden behind layers of corporate shell entities. He had personally structured those deals to ensure absolute anonymity. Nobody but him knew the complete architecture of the offshore network. Nobody except the person who prepared his private taxes every single year. A heavy glass ashtray suddenly shattered against the wall right next to Donovan's head. He flinched violently, ducking away from the flying shards of crystal. Arthur Sterling, the senior managing partner and founder of the investment bank, stood at the head of the conference table. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged as he glared at Donovan with absolute hatred. "You told me your wife was a nobody who couldn't even balance a checkbook!" Arthur screamed, his voice raw and echoing off the glass walls. He slammed his fist down onto the polished oak table, rattling the expensive coffee cups. "You assured this board that she was completely oblivious. You swore to me that she was just a compliant little housewife who asked 0 questions. Who the hell compiled this level of forensic auditing? This is not a simple data leak, Donovan. This is a targeted, weaponized, perfectly executed financial assassination. They have every single transaction dating back 5 years. They have the routing numbers. They have the offshore registry codes." Donovan backed away, his custom leather shoes slipping slightly on the spilled coffee. "Arthur, listen to me," Donovan pleaded, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "I can fix this. I just need access to the backup servers." Clara is an idiot. She barely knows how to turn on a computer. There is absolutely no way she orchestrated a leak of this magnitude. She does not possess the intellect or the resources to pull off a coordinated federal raid. Somebody hacked my personal servers. We are dealing with a professional corporate espionage firm. Arthur marched forward and grabbed Donovan by the collar of his expensive suit. He shoved him hard against the glass wall. "Do you think the federal agents tearing apart my trading floor care if it was a hacker or your estranged wife?" Arthur spat, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. "You brought this infection into my firm. You used our secure servers to hide your personal embezzlement, and you left a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to my front door. You are entirely finished in this industry, Donovan. I will personally ensure you spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for dragging my legacy into this mess." Arthur shoved Donovan backward and turned his attention back to the television broadcast. The news anchor was receiving a live update through her earpiece. She pressed her hand to her ear, her expression shifting to one of intense focus. "We have just received confirmation regarding the anonymous source of this unprecedented financial leak," the anchor announced, her voice ringing clearly through the boardroom speakers. The forensic audit, which includes over 10,000 pages of heavily encrypted financial documents, was independently compiled and securely delivered to the federal authorities by the Risk Management Division of Apex Holdings. Donovan stopped breathing, his heart slammed against his ribs. The name echoed in his mind like a death knell. Apex Holdings. It was the exact same mysterious corporation that had purchased his mortgage debt yesterday morning. It was the exact same ruthless entity that had sent a private security team to forcefully evict him from his suburban mansion. They had not just bought his debt to kick him out of his house. They had systematically acquired his entire life. They owned his debt, they owned his secrets, and now they owned his utter destruction. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place. Clara never fought him on the post-nuptial agreement. She surrendered because she already knew she possessed the keys. His phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "I was never just typing spreadsheets, Donovan." The glowing crystal chandeliers of the Grand Heritage Hotel ballroom cast a very brilliant, unforgiving light over the city's wealthiest elite. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos glided effortlessly across the polished marble floors, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with imported caviar and vintage champagne. Near the massive ice sculpture dominating the entrance, a desperate group huddled together in stark contrast to the effortless luxury surrounding them. Helen adjusted the collar of her outdated designer gown with trembling fingers. Thomas stood rigidly beside her, his tailored suit completely unable to mask the heavy, suffocating anxiety radiating from his rapidly deteriorating posture. They had completely emptied their final emergency savings account just to purchase these charity gala tickets. Thomas desperately needed to secure a private investor to save his manufacturing business from total bankruptcy. His factory was on the absolute brink of foreclosure after Donovan's financial empire suddenly collapsed. Helen scanned the crowded ballroom, aggressively searching for any familiar socialite who might throw them a lifeline. Instead, the prominent wives she once commanded completely ignored her, turning their backs and whispering behind their gloved hands. The social exile was absolutely agonizing, forcing Helen to grip her empty champagne flute in silent rage. Donovan stood slightly behind Thomas, sweating profusely through his expensive undershirt. The former investment banking titan looked entirely unrecognizable. His eyes darted frantically around the opulent room, terrified that federal agents might suddenly storm through the massive mahogany doors to arrest him in front of the city's high society. He had spent the past 3 entire days dodging relentless reporters and federal subpoenas. His offshore accounts were completely frozen. His assets were seized, and Sydney had violently abandoned him the absolute second she realized his immense wealth was entirely gone. He was running purely on blind, sheer animalistic panic now. Isaiah paced restlessly beside Donovan, glaring at the prominent real estate developers who were happily drinking champagne across the room. His previously luxurious downtown condominium project was officially dead. The construction site was securely locked behind solid steel metal fences, heavily plastered with legal foreclosure notices authorized directly by Apex Holdings. His reputation in the commercial development sector was thoroughly destroyed. Investors were actively suing him for gross negligence and rampant fraud. He grabbed a fresh drink from a passing waiter and downed it in one aggressive gulp, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the fragile crystal glass. Rachel crossed her arms over her chest, scowling deeply at the extravagant diamond necklaces worn by the passing women. She aggressively adjusted the strap of her borrowed handbag, her face contorted into a mask of pure, spoiled resentment. She turned toward her mother, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "This is entirely humiliating," Rachel loudly complained, completely ignoring the disapproving glances from nearby guests. "We are literally begging for scraps like common peasants. If Clara had just given him a son, Donovan would not have cut off our credit cards in the first place. She has ruined my entire life. She was always a selfish, worthless liability." Rachel continued, her voice growing increasingly shrill. She knew exactly how important Donovan's bank was to our family's social status. She knew my monthly allowance depended entirely on Isaiah's commercial real estate income. Instead of simply playing her proper role and keeping her husband happy, she decided to throw a massive tantrum and destroy all of our financial stability. Now I am forced to wear last season's dresses and ride in regular taxis. It is completely, absolutely unacceptable. She completely failed her most basic traditional duties as a wife and ruined us all. Helen nodded in aggressive agreement, her expression hardening with fierce maternal vindictiveness. "Your sister has always been an ungrateful burden." Helen spat, narrowing her eyes at a passing photographer. "We gave her a beautiful wedding, we secured her a wealthy husband, and she squandered every single advantage because of her own profound incompetence. She drove Donovan away by being completely inadequate. Now we are forced to scrape together our last pennies just to attend this charity event and beg for financial mercy. When I find out exactly where she is currently hiding, I will personally make her pay for this." The sharp ringing sound of a heavy silver spoon tapping against a crystal microphone brought the entire ballroom to an immediate, breathless silence. The elegant string quartet stopped playing instantly. A distinguished man in a dark tuxedo stepped up to the main podium located at the base of the grand sweeping staircase. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, his deep voice echoing powerfully through the surround sound speakers. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for this wonderful cause. We have finally raised an unprecedented amount of capital for the Children's Hospital, breaking every single previous philanthropic record ever established." However, the host continued, a wide, charismatic smile spreading across his face. "We must acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of our primary benefactor this evening. She is the elusive CEO of Apex Holdings." This incredible individual not only fully funded the pediatric wing, but she recently acquired several major commercial assets throughout our city, establishing herself as a true titan of industry. She is a visionary leader who prefers to let her actions speak far louder than words. Tonight she has decided to make her very first public appearance. Please kindly direct your full attention to the grand staircase right now. The heavy velvet curtains at the top of the marble staircase slowly pulled back. A brilliant singular spotlight snapped on, illuminating the landing with absolute blinding clarity. Donovan dropped his crystal glass. It shattered violently against the floor, but nobody noticed. Thomas and Helen instantly stopped breathing, their faces draining of color. Rachel let out a sharp, pathetic gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. Clara stood triumphantly at the top of the wide marble stairs. She wore a breathtaking custom black haute couture gown, radiating untouchable power. Cradled safely against her chest, swathed in premium silk, was her beautiful baby daughter. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause, the sound washing over the paralyzed group at the base of the staircase like a tidal wave. Donovan stared up at his former wife, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The realization that the woman he had discarded and underestimated was the architect of his total ruin locked his knees in place. Helen clutched Thomas's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket as she hyperventilated. Isaiah took a staggering step backward, dropping his empty champagne flute onto the marble floor. But Rachel refused to accept the reality standing before them. The blinding spotlight shining on Clara broke something inside Rachel's fragile, deeply entitled mind. She pushed past her frozen parents, her cheap heels clicking aggressively against the polished stone as she marched directly toward the grand staircase. Her face twisted into a grotesque mask of fury and absolute denial. She pointed a trembling finger up at Clara, her shrill voice slicing through the elegant classical music that had just resumed playing. "You are a complete fraud," Rachel shrieked, causing several wealthy donors to turn and stare in absolute disgust. "You stole somebody else's invitation." Clara did not flinch. She stood at the top of the marble steps, gently rocking her sleeping daughter, her posture radiating absolute dominance. She looked down at her former sister-in-law with the cold, detached amusement of a queen observing a peasant riot. Rachel reached the bottom step, her chest heaving as she glared upward. "There is absolutely no way you are the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings!" Rachel screamed, her voice echoing painfully off the vaulted ceiling. "You probably slept your way into this gala. Who did you blackmail to get that dress? You are a glorified bookkeeper who married my brother for his money." The surrounding guests began to murmur, stepping away from the erratic woman making a scene. Rachel noticed their judgment, but her humiliated rage blinded her to the consequences. She turned abruptly and snatched a full glass of dark red wine from a passing waiter's silver tray. The liquid sloshed over the rim, staining her fingers, but she gripped the crystal stem like a weapon. She whipped her body back around to face Clara, her eyes burning with a decade of misplaced resentment and childish jealousy. "You are a pathetic, ugly college dropout," Rachel yelled. "You have always been completely jealous of my life." Rachel continued her unhinged tirade, taking a threatening step up the stairs. "You purposely stole my spotlight at my Sweet 16 party, when you showed up looking like a cheap tragedy, and you are trying to do it again right now. You destroyed my brother's career because you knew you would never be good enough for our family. You could never fit into our social circle, so you decided to ruin it for all of us. You are nothing but a common thief pretending to be royalty." Clara maintained her terrifying composure. She did not raise her voice to defend herself. She did not clutch her baby tighter in fear. She simply watched Rachel unravel, allowing the spoiled woman to publicly document her own profound delusion for the city's most powerful residents to witness. Rachel raised the wine glass high above her shoulder, fully intending to hurl the dark red liquid directly at Clara's pristine haute couture gown and her sleeping child. "I am going to expose you to everyone in this room," Rachel shrieked, preparing to throw the glass. Before Rachel's arm could move forward, Clara simply raised her free hand and snapped her fingers once. The sharp, commanding sound echoed with startling clarity. Instantly, two massive security guards materialized from the shadows behind the staircase. They moved with terrifying practiced efficiency. One guard firmly intercepted Rachel's raised arm, his massive hand clamping down on her wrist like a steel vice. He effortlessly plucked the wine glass from her trembling fingers before a single drop could spill. The second guard stepped squarely between Rachel and the stairs, creating an impenetrable human wall. "Let go of me!" Rachel screamed, struggling violently against the guard's iron grip. "Do you know who my family is? My brother is Donovan Sterling. We own this city." The guard ignored her pathetic demands smoothly, twisting her arm behind her back and forcefully marching her away from the grand staircase. He dragged her roughly toward the charity bar, located near the ballroom exit, physically removing the disruption from the center of attention. Clara finally descended the stairs, the crowd parting respectfully to give the billionaire executive a wide, clear path. The elegant host returned to the podium, his booming voice smoothly overriding Rachel's distant, fading protests. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, gesturing grandly toward Clara as she glided across the floor. "We have just received the final tally for tonight's silent auction. The winning bid of $5 million for the brand new pediatric surgical wing goes to our esteemed host, Clara." The ballroom erupted into another thunderous standing ovation. The wealthy elite clapped enthusiastically, completely forgetting the Sterling family's embarrassing existence. Rachel, currently pinned against the mahogany charity bar by the unyielding security guard, watched the scene unfold with absolute horror. Her entire reality had just collapsed. In a final desperate attempt to salvage a shred of her shattered dignity in front of the staring bartenders, she yanked her arm free from the guard. "I do not need this trashy party anyway," Rachel snapped, slapping her premium platinum credit card onto the wet bar counter. "Give me a bottle of your most expensive champagne to go." The bartender silently took her card and swiped it through the terminal. The small machine emitted a loud, sharp, unforgiving error beep. The young bartender looked down at the screen, then looked directly at Rachel with a completely deadpan expression. "Declined," he stated loudly, his deep voice carrying clearly over the playing music. "Your account is completely frozen, ma'am." Donovan did not even glance toward the bar where his sister was currently throwing a humiliated red-faced tantrum over her declined credit card. His mind was racing, calculating permutations and rapid survival strategies at lightning speed. The federal raid, the frozen accounts, the sudden eviction, and now this blinding reality. Clara was not a victim. She was the apex predator who had systematically dismantled his entire existence. But Donovan possessed an innate toxic arrogance that had shielded him his entire life. He firmly believed he could talk his way out of a burning building. He straightened his designer suit jacket, plastered on his signature devastatingly charismatic smile, and marched directly toward the velvet ropes cordoning off the VIP area. He shoved past a tuxedoed server and aggressively bypassed the two security guards attempting to flank the corridor. "I am the husband of the host," Donovan snapped with sharp, practiced authority, brushing their hands away. "We need to speak privately right now." The guards hesitated, looking toward the end of the hallway where Clara had just retreated. A slight nod from Clara's personal assistant allowed him passage. Donovan stepped into the opulent, soundproof VIP lounge. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind him, completely cutting off the ambient noise of the charity gala. Clara sat behind a massive antique desk, casually adjusting her diamond cuffs. Her private nanny had already whisked their sleeping daughter into the adjoining secure suite. Donovan took a deep breath, instantly slipping back into the charming, manipulative persona that had initially ensnared her a decade ago. "Clara, you look absolutely breathtaking tonight," he began, his voice dropping an octave to that familiar soothing timbre. "I have to admit, you completely played me. It was brilliant. You are brilliant." Clara did not smile. She simply watched him, her expression as unreadable and cold as carved marble. She leaned back in her high leather chair, resting her hands on the polished wood surface. "Save the performance, Donovan," she instructed smoothly. You only compliment people when you are trying to pick their pockets. You have precisely 3 minutes before I have my security team physically throw you out into the street with the rest of the garbage." Donovan stepped closer, resting his palms flat on the edge of the desk, leaning in to invade her personal space. He tried to project raw sincerity, completely ignoring the federal indictment currently hanging over his head. "We do not have to fight like this, Clara," he murmured, attempting to catch her eye. "We are a team. We have always been a team. You proved your point beautifully. You showed me exactly how powerful and capable you are. I respect that. I admire that. But you have to understand why things got so complicated between us." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, playing the role of the misunderstood, neglected husband to absolute perfection. "I only strayed because you were so incredibly obsessed with your little startup company. You spent every single night hunched over your laptop, ignoring my needs, ignoring our marriage. You locked me out emotionally. A man requires attention, Clara. I was lonely. Sydney was simply a convenient distraction because my own wife was too busy playing pretend CEO to fulfill her domestic duties." Clara let out a short, sharp laugh that held absolutely zero humor. It was a terrifying sound. "So my dedication to building a multi-billion-dollar financial empire was simply an inconvenience to your fragile male ego?" she asked, raising a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You embezzled millions of dollars from your clients, committed federal wire fraud, and abandoned your pregnant wife for a junior analyst because I did not cater to your every whim." Donovan nodded eagerly, completely missing the dangerous razor-sharp sarcasm lacing her words. He truly believed his manipulation was working. "Exactly," he agreed smoothly. "But look at where we are now. You have the money. You have the absolute ultimate power. I have the high-level corporate connections and the prestigious family legacy. We can completely merge our assets. We can rule this entire city together, Clara. Just imagine the absolute financial monopoly we could establish." He walked around the side of the mahogany desk, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am willing to forgive this entire elaborate revenge scheme. I will publicly take you back. We can even merge my son into our family. He needs a stable, wealthy environment, and Sydney is clearly unfit to raise an heir. You can be the generous, forgiving wife who accepted my child, and we can move forward as the most powerful power couple in the corporate sector. Just call off the federal dogs, unfreeze my accounts, and let me guide your portfolio." Clara did not move away from him. She slowly opened the top drawer of the heavy mahogany desk and pulled out a thick, sealed medical envelope. She placed it deliberately on the center of the table, tapping the crisp white paper with one manicured fingernail. "You always were remarkably arrogant, Donovan," she stated, her voice dropping to a chilling, absolute calm. "You really think you still hold the winning hand today, simply because you produced a male heir?" She slid the sealed medical envelope directly across the mahogany table until it touched his fingertips. "What is this?" Donovan asked, his charming smile finally faltering as a sudden cold dread pooled in his stomach. "I own the private medical clinic where Sydney gave birth," Clara explained, watching his face drain of color. "I ran a quiet, highly classified internal audit on the maternity ward records. You might want to open that, Donovan. Your precious male heir has absolutely zero matching DNA with you. He is the biological son of Arthur Sterling, your senior managing director. You threw away your entire life for another man's child. You have absolutely nothing left anywhere in this world tonight. You completely pathetic, thoroughly ruined, and utterly broken little man. Leave." The morning sun glared off the towering glass facade of the investment bank, but Donovan felt absolutely nothing but a freezing, hollow rage. He had not slept a single second since stumbling out of the charity gala. His custom tuxedo was severely wrinkled, his tie was missing, and his eyes were heavily bloodshot. He marched through the pristine marble lobby of the firm, completely ignoring the frantic shouts of the front desk receptionist. He swiped his executive access badge at the private elevator bank, his hand shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. The heavy steel doors slid shut, carrying him up to the 50th floor. When the elevator dinged, he stormed out like a feral animal. The executive floor was eerily quiet, still reeling from the federal raid just days prior. Executive assistant scrambled out of his way as he barreled down the carpeted hallway toward the primary corner office. The heavy oak door bore a polished brass nameplate reading, Arthur Sterling, Senior Managing Director. Donovan did not bother knocking. He raised his heavy leather shoe and kicked the door with every ounce of physical strength he possessed. The wood splintered around the lock, and the door crashed inward, slamming brutally against the interior wall. Arthur stood behind his massive desk, calmly placing a stack of legal documents into a cardboard box. He looked up, adjusting his expensive reading glasses with absolute infuriating composure. "You are officially trespassing," Donovan Arthur stated smoothly, completely unbothered by the violently broken door. "I fired you 3 days ago. Security is already on their way up here to remove you." Donovan crossed the spacious office in 3 massive strides. He slammed the crumpled medical envelope from the gala directly onto the center of the desk. The crisp white paper landed heavily over the documents. "You slept with my wife." Donovan roared, his voice cracking with pure unhinged hysteria. "You slept with Sydney while she was working as your junior analyst. You got her pregnant and then you convinced me to ruin my marriage for her." Arthur glanced down at the medical envelope, an amused smirk creeping across his aged, deeply lined face. He did not deny it. He did not apologize. He simply let out a short, cold, patronizing laugh. "I did not convince you to do anything," Donovan Arthur replied, leaning forward and resting his knuckles on the desk. "Your own boundless, pathetic ego did all the heavy lifting. You saw a beautiful younger woman paying attention to you and you threw away a brilliant wife because you desperately needed to feel like a god. I simply capitalized on your inherent massive character flaws." Donovan lunged forward, grabbing Arthur by the lapels of his tailored suit. He slammed the older man backward against the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The glass groaned under their combined weight. "You destroyed my life," Donovan screamed, spit flying from his lips as he shook the managing director. "That boy is your biological son. I paid for his nursery. I set up his trust funds. I burned down my entire world for your bastard child." Arthur aggressively shoved Donovan away, smoothing down his ruined lapels. He stared at Donovan with a look of absolute, terrifying pity. "You still do not understand how this industry works, do you?" Arthur asked, his voice dripping with supreme condescension. "You honestly believed you earned your spot in this corner office. You actually thought your financial modeling was brilliant. Let me break reality down for you, Donovan. You were never a genius. Your portfolios were aggressively mediocre. You were a painfully average broker with a massive superiority complex. I promoted you to senior partner for one extremely specific reason. You were the perfect gullible idiot." Donovan stumbled backward, shaking his head in aggressive denial. "You promoted me because I tripled our quarterly earnings." Donovan stammered, his arrogant facade completely fracturing. Arthur laughed loudly, shaking his head. "I handed you those massive accounts on a silver platter," Arthur corrected brutally. "I specifically fed you the most lucrative corporate clients to artificially inflate your salary. I needed you rich, arrogant, and completely oblivious. My own wife comes from a prominent political family. A messy divorce and an illegitimate child with a junior analyst would have destroyed my entire career and my political aspirations. I needed a wealthy, arrogant patsy to marry Sydney, give her a luxurious lifestyle, and raise my son without ever asking a single difficult question. You were not promoted for your brilliance, Donovan. You were promoted because you were incredibly easy to manipulate. I bought your total compliance with a fancy title and a corner office. You were nothing but my highly paid babysitter." The heavy oak door swung open completely. 3 massive security guards stormed into the corner office, their faces grim and determined. They grabbed Donovan by both arms, twisting his limbs painfully behind his back. "Get your hands off me!" Donovan thrashed violently, kicking his expensive shoes against the door frame as they aggressively dragged him backward out of the room. "You are going to prison for this, Arthur. You are entirely finished." Arthur simply adjusted his tie and returned to packing his cardboard box. "Throw this trash out onto the street," Arthur instructed the guards without looking up. Donovan was frog-marched roughly down the main executive corridor, humiliated in front of the entire remaining administrative staff. His humiliating screaming echoed off the polished marble floors. As the guards dragged him past the central glass-enclosed executive boardroom, the massive double doors suddenly swung open. The entire board of directors stood together in a tight, terrified circle. Donovan stopped struggling, his breath catching in his throat. Clara casually strolled directly out of the main boardroom. She was wearing a razor-sharp tailored white business suit, holding a leather portfolio. She handed a freshly signed contract to the trembling bank president. "Thank you for your swift cooperation," Clara announced smoothly, her voice carrying absolute authority. "I officially own this investment bank." The heavy glass doors of the investment bank slid shut, severing Donovan's screams from the lobby. Clara did not turn her head to watch her former husband being tossed onto the pavement. She handed the finalized acquisition documents to her corporate attorney and walked briskly toward her private car. Her hostile takeover of the financial sector was officially complete. Now she needed to address the crumbling real estate empire of her former relative by marriage. 3 blocks away, torrential morning rain lashed against the towering glass facade of Apex Holdings headquarters. Isaiah stood on the flooded sidewalk, completely unprotected from the downpour. His tailored wool suit clung to his shivering frame, ruined by freezing water. He had been standing outside the executive entrance for 3 agonizing hours. His development company was exactly 4 hours away from absolute bankruptcy. His downtown condominium project, the crown jewel of his portfolio, was currently locked behind steel fences plastered with foreclosure notices authorized by Clara's legal team. His investors were threatening lawsuits, contractors had walked off the job, and his credit lines were completely frozen. He was bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate. The only person on the planet who possessed the financial liquidity to save him was the woman his family had spent a decade ruthlessly humiliating. A sleek black town car pulled up to the private executive entrance. Isaiah lunged forward, his leather shoes slipping dangerously on the wet pavement. He aggressively intercepted a professional woman carrying digital tablets as she stepped out of the vehicle. It was Clara's personal assistant. Isaiah grabbed her umbrella handle, his face twisted into a mask of pure panic. "You have to let me inside right now," Isaiah begged, rainwater pouring down his face and dripping onto the assistant's pristine tablet screen. "Please, you have to tell Clara I am out here waiting for her. I just need 5 minutes of her time. I will gladly give her whatever corporate equity she wants. I will instantly sign over my voting rights. Just give me 5 minutes before the banks officially seize my commercial assets at noon." The assistant looked at his soaked form with absolute disgust. She tapped a single silver button on her secure earpiece, speaking in a low, rapid whisper. A moment later, she gestured toward the heavy security doors. 2 massive guards stepped aside, allowing Isaiah to stumble into the climate-controlled marble lobby. He left a trail of muddy water across the pristine floor as he was immediately marched into the private executive elevator. The silent ride to the top floor felt like an eternity. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He rehearsed his pitch desperately, trying to summon the charisma that had built his real estate firm. But as the elevator doors slid open, his false confidence completely evaporated into thin air. Clara sat behind a massive, polished obsidian desk. The penthouse office offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the terrible storm ravaging the city below. She did not look up from her holographic monitor when Isaiah stumbled into the room, dripping freezing water onto her imported silk rug. She was the absolute picture of untouchable corporate dominance, radiating a terrifying quiet power. Isaiah swallowed hard, his throat completely dry, despite the freezing rain soaking his clothes. He stepped forward nervously, leaving dark, muddy footprints behind him. "Clara, please." Isaiah started, his voice trembling with sheer desperation. "You have to stop the immediate foreclosure on the downtown tower. You are freezing me out of my own construction sites. My primary lenders are pulling out because Apex Holdings is intentionally blocking my municipal permits. I am losing millions of dollars every single hour. Clara slowly raised her eyes. She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers together. She looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a trapped insect. You defaulted on your primary loans, Isaiah, she stated smoothly, her voice devoid of any human emotion. Apex Holdings simply purchased that highly toxic debt. We are legally exercising our right to seize the collateral. It is just standard corporate business. Isaiah rushed to the edge of the obsidian desk, planting his wet, shaking hands on the pristine surface. He tried to force a warm, familiar smile, falling back on the manipulative tactics his family always used to maintain their power. This is not just business, Clara, he pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. We are family. We have known each other for 10 years. Family looks out for each other when things get tough. I never agreed with how Donovan treated you. I swear to you, I always told Rachel you were the smart one. I knew you had incredible potential. You do not have to destroy my entire livelihood just to get back at them. We can be equal partners. We can completely dominate the commercial real estate market together. Just release the municipal permits and fund the final construction phase. Clara stared at his pathetic, shivering form. The absolute audacity of his gaslighting was almost entertaining. For 10 years, Isaiah had ruthlessly mocked her background, purposely excluded her from family investments, and actively encouraged Rachel's toxic bullying. Now, facing total financial annihilation, he actually dared to invoke the sacred concept of family loyalty. Clara did not argue with him. She did not raise her voice or list his past transgressions. She simply reached out and grabbed the edge of her massive monitor. With a smooth, deliberate motion, she slowly turned the bright screen around to face him. Isaiah's blood ran completely cold. On the monitor was a live video feed showing Marcus Vance, his primary corporate rival. Marcus smiled triumphantly, holding a signed digital contract directly to the camera lens. I have absolutely no interest in partnering with a failing developer, Clara announced smoothly. I just transferred all of your exclusive municipal construction permits to Vance Development for exactly $1 single. As of this exact moment in time, your company is officially completely dead. The heavy obsidian doors of Clara's penthouse office had barely clicked shut behind the ruined Isaiah when a violent commotion erupted in the outer reception area. Muffled shouting echoed through the thick glass walls, followed by the distinct sound of a heavy decorative vase crashing onto the marble floor. Clara did not flinch. She slowly closed the digital file on Vance Development and waited. Seconds later, the doors were forcefully shoved open. Helen and Thomas stormed into the executive suite, leaving Clara's flustered personal assistant hovering anxiously in the doorway. The assistant opened her mouth to apologize, but Clara simply raised a single hand, dismissing her with a sharp gesture. The doors sealed shut once more, trapping the toxic family dynamic inside the soundproof room. Helen's designer dress was visibly wrinkled, and her normally immaculate hair was frazzled from the torrential rain outside. Thomas stood beside her, his chest heaving, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. They had bypassed the elite building's security team by throwing an absolutely unhinged screaming tantrum in the main lobby, threatening massive public lawsuits and claiming a dire family medical emergency. They carried the distinct, suffocating stench of desperate entitlement. Thomas slammed his hands down on the back of a leather guest chair, glaring at Clara as if she were a disobedient child rather than the billionaire who owned the building. You are going to fix this mess immediately, Thomas demanded, his voice booming with the aggressive authority he had used to terrorize her throughout her entire childhood. Donovan is facing federal prison. Isaiah is completely bankrupt. Rachel is wandering the city with frozen credit cards. You have humiliated this family for the absolute last time. Helen stepped forward, adjusting her damp pearl necklace, attempting to switch to a manipulative maternal tone. Clara, darling, you have made your point, Helen said, forcing a sickeningly sweet smile that did not reach her cold eyes. You proved you are a successful businesswoman. We are very proud of you. But this petty revenge has gone entirely too far. You have more money than you could ever spend. You need to transfer emergency funds to your father's accounts today to stabilize the family name. We can quietly pay off Donovan's legal fees and buy back Isaiah's construction permits. If the media finds out our family is destitute, our social standing will be permanently destroyed. You owe it to us to protect our legacy. Clara remained seated behind her obsidian desk, her posture perfectly straight. She looked at the two people who had spent 3 decades systematically crushing her spirit, prioritizing her siblings, and treating her like a worthless burden. "I owe you absolutely nothing," Clara stated, her voice as calm and sharp as shattered glass. "Your social standing is a complete illusion built on debt fraud and profound arrogance. I will not spend a single cent of my capital to save a family name that was only ever used to drag me down." His face contorted into a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. He marched around the leather chair and pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at her face. "How dare you speak to your mother like that?" Thomas roared, his voice echoing violently off the panoramic windows. "You ungrateful, selfish little wretch. I put a roof over your head. I fed you. I gave you life. You owe us every single thing you have. You would be absolutely nothing without this family. You are going to sign a check right now, or I swear to God I will destroy your reputation in this city." Clara did not raise her voice. She did not break eye contact. She simply reached down and unlocked the biometric safe built into the lower drawer of her desk. She withdrew a thick, protective plastic sleeve and dropped it heavily onto the center of the dark obsidian surface. Inside the sleeve rested a dusty, yellowed document, its edges frayed and brittle with age. Helen's breath caught in her throat. Her forced smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Thomas lowered his pointing finger, his eyes locking onto the document as the remaining color completely drained from his face. "Do you recognize this?" Clara asked quietly, sliding the plastic sleeve forward. "It took me a significant amount of time and resources to track down the original copy. My private investigators found it hidden in the archives of a disbarred attorney you paid off 15 years ago. This is Grandmother Eleanor's authentic, unaltered last will and testament." Clara opened the sleeve and began reading the document aloud. The terms were explicit. Grandmother Eleanor had left her entire $10 million fortune exclusively to Clara to start her business. "You forged her signature while she was heavily medicated in hospice," Clara stated, her voice slicing through the deadly silence of the room. "You completely stole my inheritance and illegally funneled every single penny of it to prop up Donovan's failing investments and Rachel's pathetic vanity projects. You funded your lavish lifestyle with my money." Helen gripped the edge of the desk, physically trembling. "That was 15 years ago," Thomas stammered, stepping backward. "The statute of limitations has expired. You cannot prove anything." Clara finally smiled, a cold, terrifying expression that sealed their absolute doom. The statute of limitations for criminal fraud pauses when the victim is intentionally kept unaware of the crime, Clara explained smoothly. "I officially discovered the theft exactly 3 weeks ago. I filed the criminal charges with the district attorney an hour ago. Federal agents are currently en route to your primary residence right now to secure the premises. You thought you could bury the truth forever, but your boundless greed has finally caught up with you today. The legacy you desperately wanted to protect is now a permanent criminal record. You are both going to spend the rest of your natural lives locked securely inside a federal penitentiary," Clara whispered. "No one will save you this time." Sydney threw her designer clothes into her massive Louis Vuitton suitcase, moving with frantic, desperate speed. The flat-screen television in her luxury downtown penthouse broadcast live news coverage of Donovan being violently escorted out of the investment bank. The scrolling ticker confirmed her absolute worst fears. Federal agents had frozen every single one of Donovan's offshore accounts. His assets were officially seized, and he had been formally disbarred. He was entirely broke. Worse, she knew Clara had exposed the true paternity of her child. The elaborate lies she constructed to secure a luxurious life with a gullible senior partner had completely collapsed. Donovan was no longer her golden ticket. He was a sinking ship, and Sydney had absolutely no intention of drowning with him. She zipped the suitcase shut, grabbed her crying baby, and sprinted toward the elevator. She navigated the chaotic departure terminal of the international airport with her head down, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her panic. She had quickly liquidated the diamond jewelry Donovan had purchased for her, converting them into enough cash to secure a one-way ticket to Dubai. She constantly checked her phone, terrified that federal agents might be tracking her location. She had spent the cab ride mentally rehearsing her survival strategy. She always knew Donovan was fundamentally weak and easy to manipulate. She had played him perfectly, using his massive ego to secure a lavish lifestyle while carrying Arthur Sterling's child. But she was a survivor. She was fully prepared to start over in a country with no extradition treaty, living comfortably off the hidden cash smuggled inside her bag. Sydney reached her departure gate, her heart pounding with intense adrenaline and overwhelming relief. The flight attendant announced the boarding process. Sydney gripped her boarding pass tightly, ready to leave the wreckage of Donovan's ruined life completely behind her. Before she could take another step, two tall men wearing impeccably tailored charcoal suits materialized from the surrounding crowd. They moved with a chilling efficiency, smoothly blocking her path to the boarding tunnel. The taller man reached out and placed his hand directly over her boarding pass. Sydney froze. She opened her mouth to scream, but the second man spoke first, his voice completely calm. "You are not getting on that plane, Sydney," the man stated. "We represent the legal department of Apex Holdings. Clara sends her regards. She instructed us to intercept you before you made a permanent mistake." Sydney took a defiant step backward, clutching her baby against her chest. Her initial shock instantly morphed into a highly aggressive posture. She lifted her chin, attempting to project the same arrogant confidence she used at the investment bank. She scoffed loudly. "You can tell Clara she is completely wasting her time," Sydney snapped. "You cannot touch me. I have immunity deals with the SEC. I spoke with federal investigators this morning. I gave them full access to Donovan's encrypted hard drives and private ledgers. I handed them every single piece of evidence they need to lock him up. The government guaranteed my protection in exchange for my cooperation. I am a protected witness. Move out of my way before I have you arrested for obstruction." The lead lawyer did not flinch. He simply offered her a cold, patronizing smile that made her stomach drop. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a digital tablet, sliding the device into Sydney's trembling hand. "You really should have secured your immunity deal in writing," the lawyer advised smoothly. "Your former lover was significantly faster. He has been sitting in an FBI interrogation room singing like a canary." Sydney looked down at the bright screen. A high-definition video was currently playing. It showed Donovan sitting in a stark room surrounded by federal agents. He was sweating profusely, gesturing wildly as he spoke into a microphone. Donovan's voice echoed clearly. Sydney orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme Donovan pleaded on the video. She used her position to alter the audit reports. She manipulated the accounting software and funneled the stolen capital directly into her own offshore shell corporations. "I am totally innocent." She was the absolute mastermind behind the entire fraud operation. Sydney felt the blood completely drain from her face. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to lean heavily against a concrete pillar to keep from collapsing. Donovan had completely thrown her under the bus. He preemptively framed her for every financial crime he committed, stripping away her leverage. Her supposed immunity deal was entirely worthless. The government was building a massive criminal case against her. The lawyer smoothly retrieved the tablet from her shaking hands. He reached back into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single generic bus ticket. He held it out to her, his expression remaining completely ruthless. "Clara is offering you a very simple arrangement," the lawyer stated quietly. "You will immediately sign a sworn affidavit directly contradicting Donovan's fabricated narrative. You will agree to testify against him in state court regarding his corporate espionage and wire fraud. In exchange for your total cooperation, Clara will quietly instruct her political contacts to redirect the federal investigation back onto Donovan. The SEC will drop all pending charges." Sydney stared at the cheap bus ticket, her vision blurring with tears of absolute defeat. Her luxurious penthouse and her dreams of living in Dubai were completely gone. She was entirely at Clara's mercy. She took the bus ticket. "You will take this ticket," the lawyer instructed, his voice as cold as ice. "You will board a bus to a small town in the Midwest. You will never set foot in this city again. You will never attempt to contact Clara. If you violate these terms, Clara will personally hand the FBI the irrefutable evidence proving you laundered money." Sydney nodded silently, her spirit completely broken. She turned away from the luxury boarding gate carrying her baby and a single heavy suitcase and began the long, humiliating walk toward the bus terminal. As Sydney's bus rolled out of the city limits, a fleet of unmarked black government vehicles silently converged on the sprawling suburban estate of Helen and Thomas. The heavy oak front door of the estate crashed open. Helen, wearing a silk morning robe and holding a crystal glass of expensive sparkling water, dropped her drink. The crystal shattered across the imported Italian tile. Armed agents wearing dark windbreakers stamped with the letters IRS quickly fanned out across the pristine foyer, immediately securing the perimeter. Thomas stumbled out of his private home office, his face pale and his hands shaking violently. He demanded to know the meaning of this intrusion, attempting to summon the booming, aggressive authority he always used to control his family. The lead agent did not even blink. He shoved a thick stack of federal warrants directly into Thomas's chest, officially declaring the immediate seizure of all physical and liquid assets tied to the estate. A piercing, hysterical scream echoed from the sweeping grand staircase. Rachel sprinted down the carpeted steps, her face twisted into a mask of pure panic. 2 federal agents were already hauling massive, heavy-duty trash bags down the corridor, systematically emptying her massive walk-in closets. Rachel lunged at an agent carrying an armful of her exclusive Hermes and Chanel handbags. She clawed frantically at the leather straps, completely unhinged. "Get your filthy hands off my things!" Rachel shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Those bags belong to me. You have absolutely no right to take them. They are limited editions." The agent easily sidestepped her frantic grabbing, handing the bags off to a colleague who began logging them onto an evidence clipboard. Outside the massive bay windows, Rachel watched in absolute horror as a flatbed tow truck hitched up her custom, white Porsche. The luxury vehicle, a birthday gift funded entirely by Clara's stolen inheritance, was being dragged unceremoniously down the driveway. Rachel collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, gasping for air. Her perfectly curated world of unearned luxury was disintegrating right in front of her eyes. She scrambled for her diamond-encrusted smartphone, her fingers slipping frantically across the screen. She dialed the only number she knew connected to the power currently tearing her life apart. Clara sat in her silent penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline. Her personal cell phone vibrated on the obsidian desk. She noted the caller ID, tapped the screen, and placed the phone on speaker. "Clara, you have to stop them right now!" Rachel sobbed hysterically into the receiver, the sounds of agents cataloging expensive artwork echoing clearly in the background. "They are taking my cars, they are taking my clothes, they are locking us out of our own bank accounts. You cannot possibly do this to us. I have never worked a single day in my entire life. What am I supposed to do without my money?" Clara leaned back in her chair, listening to the pathetic, sobbing voice of the sister who had spent 20 years mercilessly tormenting her. Clara felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. "You can start by applying for a job at that little downtown coffee shop you used to relentlessly make fun of me for working at," Clara replied, her voice smooth and devoid of any sympathy. "They are currently hiring shift managers. It pays minimum wage, but it builds excellent character. I highly recommend comfortable shoes." Rachel let out a guttural scream of pure rage, but Clara had already ended the call, cutting the audio feed dead. Back in the chaotic mansion foyer, Helen stood completely frozen, watching her opulent life being systematically dismantled and boxed up by government employees. Her fake high society friends were undoubtedly watching from their neighboring estates, witnessing her absolute public humiliation. The legacy she had violently protected was reduced to cardboard evidence boxes. Thomas frantically cornered the lead IRS agent, waving a crumpled folder he had managed to snatch from his desk drawer. "You can take the house," Thomas stammered, his voice dripping with desperate bargaining. "You can take the cars and the jewelry, but you cannot touch our personal life insurance policies. They are completely protected under state bankruptcy exemptions. We still have $3 million secured in those accounts. We are not completely destitute." The lead agent stopped writing on his clipboard. He looked at Thomas with a mixture of professional detachment and profound pity. He reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a freshly stamped judicial order, handing it directly to Helen, who was trembling violently. "Under normal bankruptcy proceedings, your life insurance would indeed be protected," the agent stated calmly, his voice carrying through the ruined foyer. "However, this is not a standard bankruptcy. This is a federal asset forfeiture resulting from a massive criminal fraud conviction." Helen looked down at the document, her eyes scanning the bold black text. The paper documented the exact amount they had originally stolen from Clara's grandmother. But the final total listed at the bottom of the page was astronomically higher. "Your original theft was $10 million, the agent explained, adjusting his glasses. "The court has authorized the immediate seizure of your life insurance policy to repay that stolen trust fund explicitly, including 10 years of compound interest penalties and severe punitive damages. Your remaining $3 million does not even begin to cover the interest you currently owe the victim." Helen dropped the paper. It fluttered to the marble floor, landing next to her shattered crystal glass. The absolute finality of their ruin crushed the remaining breath from her lungs. Thomas stumbled backward, hitting the wall, finally realizing that Clara had not just taken their wealth. She had legally, methodically, and permanently erased their entire existence. The golden empire they had built on her suffering was completely gone, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own monumental greed. They were finally completely and utterly ruined for all of eternity. The heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse swung open, admitting Clara and her elite team of corporate litigators. The gallery was absolutely packed to total capacity. Dozens of credentialed financial journalists, legal correspondents, and local news reporters crammed into the wooden pews, their digital recorders blinking with red lights. The air in the room felt thick, practically vibrating with the electric tension of an impending execution. This was the trial of the decade. The spectacular, highly public collapse of Apex Holdings and the shocking emergence of Clara as a shadow billionaire had captivated the entire city. Clara took her seat at the plaintiff's table wearing a razor-sharp, tailored charcoal suit. She looked perfectly composed, radiating an aura of absolute terrifying serenity. Across the aisle, the defendant's table painted a drastically different picture. Donovan sat completely alone. Every reputable defense attorney in the state had immediately rejected his case. The second Clara's legal team filed the overwhelming mountain of financial evidence. His former corporate allies had all abandoned him, terrified of catching the deadly shrapnel of his massive downfall. He wore a rumpled suit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He was frantically shuffling through a messy stack of disorganized handwritten notes. Judge Harrison, a stern man with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, struck his heavy wooden gavel. The joint divorce finalization and civil fraud hearing was officially underway. Donovan immediately leapt to his feet, completely ignoring proper courtroom protocol. He gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning entirely white. "You must listen to me," Donovan shouted. "Your Honor, I demand a complete and total freeze on all of the plaintiff's corporate assets." Donovan practically screamed, his voice cracking with desperate, unhinged energy. "This entire proceeding is a massive, coordinated conspiracy to destroy my life. Clara is not the victim here. She is a highly vindictive, deeply unstable woman who orchestrated a massive financial deception. For 10 entire years, she sat in my house eating my food, acting like a helpless, insignificant charity case. She deceived me, Your Honor. She explicitly pretended to be poor while secretly hoarding a massive billion-dollar real estate empire. She manipulated my trust, exploited my generosity, and deliberately plotted to steal my hard-earned money. She completely hid her vast wealth to intentionally sabotage my career and ruin my standing in the financial sector. She owes me exactly half of everything she currently owns, under standard marital asset laws. I am the actual victim of this marriage, and I am entitled to my rightful share of her corporate holdings. A sharp, collective, audible gasp rippled through the gallery of journalists. Keyboards clattered furiously as reporters transcribed Donovan's wild, desperate accusations. He was actually attempting to claim 50% of the empire he had spent a decade ruthlessly mocking. He stood there panting, completely convinced that his aggressive manipulation would sway the federal judge, just as it had always swayed his corrupt boardroom peers. He glared across the aisle at Clara, fully expecting to see fear, panic, or submission. Instead, Clara did not even blink. She did not raise her voice to defend herself against his pathetic lying tirade. She simply leaned back in her leather chair and gave her lead corporate attorney a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The attorney, a towering man with decades of ruthless litigation experience, calmly stood up and buttoned his jacket. He did not object to Donovan's hysterical rant. He did not raise his voice or express any emotional outrage. He simply reached into his pristine leather briefcase and pulled out a single thin plastic folder. "Your Honor," the attorney began, his voice smooth, resonant, and dripping with professional condescension. "The plaintiff fully admits that she possesses total undisputed ownership of the commercial entities previously mentioned in this court. Furthermore, the plaintiff readily agrees with the defendant's assertion that marital assets are typically subject to equitable distribution during a standard divorce proceeding." The attorney paused, allowing the words to hang heavily in the quiet courtroom. Donovan's face briefly lit up with a sickening, victorious smirk. He actually thought he had won. His chest puffed out with arrogant pride, fully convinced his performance had flawlessly manipulated the scales of justice. He actually believed Clara was surrendering her massive empire without a fight. However, the attorney continued, casually opening the plastic folder. "The defendant seems to have conveniently forgotten a highly specific, legally binding document that he personally drafted, executed, and aggressively enforced." The attorney approached the bench and handed a crisp, freshly copied document directly to the judge. He then turned around and handed a duplicate copy directly to the court clerk. "I would like to enter Plaintiff's Exhibit A into the official court record," the attorney announced, turning to face Donovan with a look of lethal, absolute amusement. "This is the comprehensive post-nuptial agreement the defendant brought into my client's hospital room immediately following her severe medical emergency. This is the exact document he aggressively threatened her into signing before she was even fully conscious. He exploited her moment of absolute physical vulnerability to ensure she would never touch a single dime of his capital." Donovan's victorious smirk instantly vanished, entirely replaced by an expression of absolute, suffocating horror. He stared at the piece of paper in the attorney's hand as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "The terms of this legally binding contract are explicitly clear," the attorney stated loudly, ensuring every single journalist in the packed room caught every single word of the crushing revelation. "The defendant purposefully forced my client to sign away all rights to his personal assets while simultaneously demanding a total permanent separation of all future wealth, personal debts, and independent corporate holdings. By ruthlessly and brutally forcing Clara to sign this document to protect his own pathetic, crumbling fortune, Donovan legally, completely, permanently, and irrevocably severed himself from making any claim whatsoever to her massive billion-dollar empire." Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, scanning the crisp pages of the post-nuptial agreement handed to him by Clara's attorney. The courtroom was dead silent, save for the frantic scratching of reporters' pens. Donovan stood frozen at the defendant's table. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly gray. In his absolute arrogance, rushing to protect his offshore accounts from the wife he deemed financially worthless. He had built an impenetrable legal fortress around her newly acquired billion-dollar empire. He had thoroughly and completely locked himself out. "Your Honor, this is an absolute outrage," Donovan suddenly yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "That document is completely invalid. I signed it under extreme duress. She manipulated me. I was emotionally compromised. She orchestrated this entire scenario to trick me into forfeiting my marital rights. She intentionally hid her wealth, and she used my momentary lapse in judgment to steal what rightfully belongs to me." Judge Harrison looked over his glasses, his expression carved from stone. "Mr. Sterling, the document clearly bears your signature. Furthermore, you are the one who drafted it, utilizing your own corporate legal letterhead." Donovan opened his mouth, grasping for a lifeline, but Clara's attorney spoke first. "Your Honor, we would like to call Clara to the stand to clarify the exact nature of the duress experienced that day." Clara smoothed the front of her tailored charcoal suit and walked toward the witness stand with deliberate steps. The bright flashing bulbs of press cameras illuminated the room, but Clara did not blink. She did not look like a broken, discarded wife. She looked like an apex predator evaluating her trapped prey. "Clara, could you please tell the court about the day this post-nuptial agreement was signed?" Her voice was ice-cold, precise, and devoid of any emotion. "It was the afternoon of November 14th, she stated clearly. "I was in a room at Mercy General Hospital. I had just endured 22 hours of agonizing labor, followed by an emergency cesarean section. I was heavily medicated, physically shattered, and recovering from severe blood loss." She paused, letting the severity of her physical state sink in. "And where was your husband Donovan during this critical medical emergency?" the attorney asked. Clara locked eyes with Donovan. "He was standing in the hospital corridor, exactly 6 feet away from my door. I was bleeding, recovering from major abdominal surgery, and begging for water. He was on a video call with his mistress, Sydney. He was loudly bragging about how he had successfully liquidated marital assets to purchase her a diamond tennis bracelet. He complained that my medical emergency was disrupting his scheduled getaway to Aspen." A collective murmur of disgust swept through the gallery. Donovan gripped the edge of his table, remaining utterly silent under the judge's glaring gaze. After concluding his call, Clara continued her tone, maintaining its lethal detachment. "Donovan entered my recovery room. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not look at our newborn child in the bassinet. He threw a pen onto my chest and shoved this post-nuptial agreement into my face. He told me that if I did not sign away my rights to his finances immediately, he would cut off my health insurance and leave me to pay the hospital bills entirely on my own." "Your Honor," Donovan shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. "This is pure slander. She is completely fabricating this story to assassinate my character." Clara's attorney did not miss a beat. "Your Honor, the plaintiff requests permission to enter Plaintiff's Exhibit B into evidence. We have subpoenaed the security footage from the hallway and the interior of Clara's recovery room at Mercy General Hospital for that specific date and time." Judge Harrison nodded sharply. "Proceed." A large digital monitor descended from the courtroom's ceiling. The screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear video feed from the hospital's security system. The footage showed the sterile hospital hallway. Donovan was clearly visible, leaning against the wall outside Clara's room. He was holding his smartphone, his face twisted into a smug, arrogant laugh. The audio, enhanced for clarity, filled the silent courtroom. "Look, Sydney, babe, I will handle the dead weight." Donovan's voice echoed through the speakers, dripping with absolute contempt. "She is high on painkillers right now. She has no idea what is going on. I had my legal team draft a total separation of assets. I am going to make her sign it right now before the drugs wear off. She is broke and terrified. I am completely walling off my capital. By the time I file the divorce papers, she will be left with absolutely nothing. I will see you in Aspen tomorrow." The video feed seamlessly switched to the camera mounted inside the recovery room. The entire courtroom watched in stunned horror. Clara lay in the hospital bed, pale and exhausted, hooked up to IV bags and heart monitors. Donovan marched into the room. He did not even glance at the newborn baby. He slammed a stack of legal documents onto Clara's lap, pressing a heavy metal pen into her trembling hand. "Sign it." Clara the recorded. Donovan demanded, his voice turning vicious and threatening. "Sign it right now or I cancel your health insurance today. You will be paying for this surgery for the rest of your miserable life." The video abruptly cut to black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and suffocating. Donovan stood completely paralyzed, his mouth hanging open, utterly destroyed by his own recorded words. The objective proof of his extreme cruelty and targeted coercion hung heavily in the air. Judge Harrison stared down at Donovan, his face burning with profound disgust. He picked up his wooden gavel. He did not say a single word to the defendant. He simply raised his arm and brought the gavel down onto the sounding block with a thunderous crack that echoed like a gunshot, signaling the absolute end of Donovan's entire life. The sharp crack of Judge Harrison's gavel sliced through the stunned silence of the federal courtroom. He simply stared down at the defendant's table, his face a mask of absolute fury. Donovan remained frozen, his mouth hanging open as the echoes of his cruel recorded voice faded from the overhead speakers. He had just watched his entire defense evaporate. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice devoid of any professional courtesy. "Mr. Sterling." The judge began, his tone cold. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed, deception, and extreme malice. But the depravity you exhibited in that hospital room, exploiting your wife's critical medical emergency to extort a post-nuptial agreement, is a new standard of utter moral bankruptcy." The judge picked up the contract and held it up. "I am hereby declaring this agreement entirely valid in its separation of assets as you explicitly drafted it to be, but completely void of any protective clauses regarding your personal liability. You legally severed yourself from Clara's wealth. You will receive absolutely nothing from her estate. Furthermore, due to the egregious nature of your frivolous countersuit, I am ordering you to pay the entirety of the plaintiff's legal fees. Every single cent of Clara's exorbitant corporate litigation costs will be immediately billed to your remaining personal accounts." Donovan physically slumped, the remaining color draining from his face. His hands trembled uncontrollably against the polished wood of the defense table. Judge Harrison was not finished. He turned to the next page in his binder. Regarding the matter of parental rights, the judge continued, his voice echoing loudly. "The evidence presented today demonstrates a profound and dangerous lack of empathy. A man who threatens to cancel his wife's health insurance hours after she gives birth is fundamentally unfit to raise a child. Therefore, I am granting Clara sole, absolute legal and physical custody of the infant. You are stripped of all parental rights, Mr. Sterling. You will have zero visitation privileges, zero legal say in the child's upbringing, and a permanent restraining order will be issued immediately." Donovan tried to speak, tried to force a protest from his dry throat, but no sound materialized. He was suffocated by his defeat. Judge Harrison then looked past Donovan, signaling to the back of the courtroom, and finally the judge announced, "Given the extensive financial evidence of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and SEC violations uncovered during the discovery phase, this court has fully cooperated with federal authorities. Your assets are currently frozen, and this civil proceeding is concluded. I am remanding you directly into federal custody." Before Donovan could even process the words, 4 heavily armed FBI agents in dark tactical windbreakers moved swiftly down the center aisle. They operated with terrifying, silent efficiency. 2 agents flanked Donovan, grabbing his arms and violently yanking them behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, ratcheting tightly around his wrists, echoed through the cavernous room. The reality of his situation finally shattered his paralyzing shock. Donovan twisted his head, his eyes darting frantically across the aisle. He desperately sought out Clara. In his fractured, panicking mind, he instinctively looked for the submissive, devoted woman he had controlled for a decade. He expected to see the quiet housewife who used to patiently cook his meals, meticulously balance his personal checkbook, and wait up for him while he entertained his mistresses. He searched for a glimmer of pity, a shred of the soft vulnerability he had exploited for so long. He found absolutely nothing of the sort. Clara sat perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. She did not gloat, she did not smile. She simply stared back at him with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate titan, observing the successful liquidation of a toxic asset. Her posture was immaculate, her gaze sharp and completely merciless. In that agonizing fraction of a second, Donovan finally understood the monumental scale of his catastrophic miscalculation. He had not married a naive, helpless victim. He had married a sleeping leviathan, and he had foolishly handed her the exact tools she needed to completely obliterate his existence. He was aggressively hauled away his expensive Italian leather shoes, dragging pathetically across the courtroom floor as the agents forcefully marched him out the side door. The gallery erupted into a chaotic frenzy of whispered conversations and frantically typing journalists. But the absolute destruction of Donovan Sterling was merely the first domino to fall in Clara's meticulously orchestrated master plan. Sitting 3 rows back in the packed gallery, Rachel and Isaiah watched Donovan's humiliating exit with wide, terrified eyes. They exchanged a panicked glance, silently agreeing that they needed to slip out of the courthouse immediately before the media turned their attention toward Donovan's known associates. Isaiah stood up, placing a hand on Rachel's elbow to guide her toward the crowded aisle. Before they could take a single step forward, 2 towering uniformed state police officers smoothly blocked their path. The lead officer did not give him the chance to speak. He unclipped a thick folded document from his utility belt and pressed it firmly against Isaiah's chest. Isaiah and Rachel Sterling, the officer stated, his voice easily cutting through the surrounding ambient noise. We have active warrants for both of your arrests. You are being officially charged with multiple counts of severe real estate tax fraud, coordinated money laundering, and grand larceny. Rachel let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Isaiah frantically scanned the warrant, his eyes locking onto the specific property records and hidden shell company accounts listed in the damning document. These were highly encrypted financial secrets that no auditor could have possibly discovered on their own. Isaiah slowly lifted his head, his panicked gaze snapping directly toward the front of the courtroom. Clara had turned around in her chair. She was looking straight at them, offering a chillingly polite nod. She had personally handed the state prosecutors every single piece of evidence required to lock them away for decades. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open to the chaotic storm outside. Freezing rain lashed the marble columns, washing away the suffocating tension that gripped the courtroom. Clara stepped onto the portico, immediately flanked by a tight ring of heavily armed private security contractors. Behind her, the muffled shouts of journalists continued as state police officers hauled a handcuffed Isaiah and Rachel toward a waiting transport van. Their hysterical protests barely registered over the downpour. Clara did not look back. The satisfying click of the legal trap springing shut on her arrogant sister and her corrupt husband was already locked in her mind. She adjusted her immaculate charcoal suit, breathing steadily. The air tasted sharp and victorious. She walked toward the stone steps, looking out at the sleek black limousines idling at the curb, their engines humming a powerful rhythm. The empire she meticulously built in total secrecy was completely secure. Every parasite that attempted to drain her lifeblood was incarcerated, bankrupt, or facing decades of federal prosecution. Before Clara could descend the staircase, 2 wretched figures shuffled out from the dark shadows of the courthouse portico. They moved with agonizing stiffness, entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant aristocrats who previously ruled the social elite. It was Helen and Thomas. Their designer wardrobes were completely gone, replaced by damp thrift store garments clinging pathetically to their shivering frames. Instead of matching monogrammed luggage, they clutched generic black garbage bags, bulging with the miserable remnants of their shattered existence. The freezing rain plastered Helen's graying hair to her skull, washing away any trace of her former elegance. Thomas, a man who spent his entire adult life barking orders and demanding absolute submission, now walked with a defeated stoop. He wheezed heavily, his chest rattling as cold air pierced his lungs. They looked like terrified refugees, completely displaced by a financial hurricane of their own making. Clara stopped at the top of the stairs, her security immediately stepping forward to form a barricade. She raised a single-gloved hand, instructing her guards to hold their position. She wanted to look them in the eyes. Helen stumbled forward, her soaked shoes slipping on the wet marble. She collided with the cold stone, dropping her garbage bag. The plastic tore open, spilling a damp pile of worn sweaters and a framed photograph of their foreclosed estate into a puddle. Helen did not bother to pick them up. Instead, she stayed on the ground, her knees pressing into the freezing wet stairs. She looked up at Clara, her face completely twisted in genuine, unvarnished agony. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing freely with the relentless rain. "Clara, please!" Helen sobbed, her voice a desperate guttural crack that echoed over the storm. "You are our daughter. We have absolutely nowhere to go. They took everything. The bank locked the doors. The accounts are frozen. We slept in a bus terminal last night. Please, Clara, you must help us." Clara looked down at the weeping woman kneeling in the dirt. She did not see a mother. She saw the same woman who had ruthlessly locked her out of the house during a blizzard for failing to secure a perfect score on a high school exam. She saw the woman who had proudly called her a disgusting embarrassment in front of a room full of wealthy dinner guests, deliberately forcing Clara to eat cold leftovers in the kitchen while Rachel was served prime rib. Thomas stepped forward, shivering violently in the biting wind. He reached out a trembling, spotted hand, attempting to summon a fraction of his former patriarchal authority. "Clara, this punishment has gone far enough." Thomas wheezed, his teeth visibly chattering. "We made some mistakes, yes, but we are your blood. You have unlimited resources now. You cannot simply abandon your own parents to die in the streets. You have made your point. Now do the right thing and put us up in one of your properties." Clara stared at his outstretched hand, feeling a profound, chilling detachment. The sheer audacity of his demand, even while standing completely destitute in the freezing rain, was a spectacular testament to his incurable narcissism. He still fundamentally believed he was owed her submission. Clara did not yell. She did not display a single ounce of anger or vindictive rage. Her revenge had moved far beyond the petty constraints of emotional outbursts. She signaled to her lead security officer, who smoothly retrieved a small, plain manila envelope from his tactical jacket and placed it directly into Clara's waiting hand. She stepped past her guards, walking right up to where Helen was openly weeping on the wet marble. Clara looked directly down into Helen's pathetic, tear-streaked face, offering an expression of absolute terrifying emptiness. "You actively chose your daughter 20 years ago, Helen," Clara stated, her voice cutting through the heavy rain with lethal surgical precision. "And you aggressively chose your son-in-law when you gladly spent my stolen inheritance to fund their luxurious lifestyle. I am not your daughter. I am simply the consequence of your unrelenting greed." Clara dropped the manila envelope. It landed with a soft, wet slap directly on top of Helen's ruined sweaters. Inside that envelope is a single set of keys and a printed address. Clara instructed, her tone completely devoid of any human warmth. "It is a tiny, heavily dilapidated one-bedroom apartment located in the absolute worst, most dangerous part of town. The rent is paid in full for exactly 1 single month. After that strict 30-day period expires, you are completely on your own. Do not ever dare attempt to contact me or approach my properties again, or I will personally ensure you are both arrested for criminal trespassing." Clara turned her back on her weeping parents without a second glance. She smoothly descended the grand marble staircase, walking perfectly upright through the torrential downpour, and stepped into the warm, illuminated cabin of her waiting black limousine. 6 months later, the winter storms had given way to the piercing sunlight of midsummer. High above the financial district, inside a sprawling corner office enclosed by floor-to-ceiling glass, Clara sat at a massive obsidian desk. The panoramic view of the city skyline spread out beneath her like conquered territory. She picked up a gold fountain pen and dragged its nib across the bottom line of a towering stack of legal documents. With that single signature, she finalized the aggressive acquisition of a rival real estate firm, adding another $2 billion to her expanding portfolio. She closed the leather-bound folder and slid it toward her executive assistant. The assistant offered a respectful nod before silently backing out of the room. Clara leaned back in her leather chair, taking a sip of black coffee. No one in this city dared to utter the words college dropout or ungrateful charity case anymore. She had obliterated those labels. The financial press now universally referred to her as the undisputed queen of the commercial sector. She was considered the most terrifying, ruthless, and respected woman in the industry. The power she wielded was absolute, forged in betrayal, and tempered by her flawless brilliance. Far away from the glittering skyscrapers and luxurious boardrooms, life had taken a drastically different turn for the people who had once treated her like dirt. Inside the bleak, guarded walls of the Federal Correctional Complex, Donovan Sterling gripped the splintered wooden handle of a foul-smelling mop. He wore a stained, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes as he forcefully pushed the dirty mop across the gray concrete floor of the prison cafeteria. A corrections officer shouted a harsh command, ordering Donovan to clean a massive spill near the trash receptacles. Donovan flinched instinctively, bowing his head in submission as he hurried to obey the barked order. There were no offshore accounts to save him here. There were no expensive corporate lawyers to bully his victims. He was entirely stripped of his arrogant privilege, reduced to a mere inmate identification number, facing a 15-year sentence for grand larceny and severe corporate embezzlement. Across the state, the sun beat down mercilessly on a massive commercial development site. Isaiah wiped a thick mixture of sweat and construction dust from his blistered forehead. He wore a cheap, bright yellow hard hat and a neon-reflective vest over a sweat-soaked shirt. He strained with all his remaining strength to lift a heavy cinder block, his muscles screaming in protest. Just 6 months ago, Isaiah had proudly owned this parcel of prime real estate. He had planned to build a luxury condominium complex using heavily laundered funds. Now stripped of his entire portfolio and saddled with massive restitution debts to avoid prison time, he was working as a manual day laborer on the very land he once commanded. He grunted under the crushing weight, his hands raw and calloused, completely invisible to the wealthy developers touring the site in their air-conditioned vehicles. 10 miles away, Rachel stood behind the scratched plastic counter of a discount retail store, wearing a deeply unflattering red polyester polo shirt with a plastic name tag pinned to her chest. A belligerent customer was loudly screaming in her face over an expired 50-cent coupon. Rachel's hands shook as she frantically typed the override code into the ancient, malfunctioning cash register. She apologized profusely, her voice cracking with profound humiliation. Her designer dresses and imported handbags had been auctioned off months ago by federal bankruptcy trustees. Her wealthy socialite friends had instantly blocked her number, the exact second the state police dragged her out of the courthouse in handcuffs. Now she spent her days scanning cheap merchandise and sweeping the fitting rooms, desperately counting down the agonizing minutes until the end of her minimum wage shift. Deep inside the decaying industrial district on the 4th floor of a crumbling, cockroach-infested brick tenement building, Helen and Thomas sat in their cramped, suffocatingly hot one-bedroom apartment. The walls were stained a sickening yellow, and the single window rattled violently every time a heavy freight truck rumbled down the cracked street below. The tiny space reeked of cheap canned soup and profound despair. Helen paced the warped linoleum floor, clutching her head as she screamed at Thomas. "You lost everything!" Helen shrieked, her voice echoing off the peeling ceiling. "You trusted Isaiah. You mocked Clara. You told me we were invincible. Now look at us. We are living like animals." Thomas sat slumped on a sagging, stained mattress, his hands covering his ears. "Shut up, Helen," he yelled back, his voice lacking any of its former power. "You are the one who pushed her away. You are the one who treated her like a servant. You ruined this family." They turned on each other with a vicious, unyielding toxicity. The money that had once bound their fragile marriage together was entirely gone, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated hatred. They were trapped in a miserable cage of their own design, permanently banished from the elite society they had worshipped over their own daughter. Clara stood up from her desk and walked toward the massive glass window. She placed her palm flat against the cool pane, looking down at the tiny cars and scurrying pedestrians far below. She did not feel an ounce of guilt. She did not lose a single second of sleep over the spectacular downfall of the people who had maliciously attempted to destroy her life. They had dug their own graves with their overwhelming greed, and she had simply provided the shovels. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp, air-conditioned air of her sanctuary. The heavy chains of familial obligation, the toxic expectations, and the suffocating emotional abuse were completely shattered. Clara smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure victory. She had not merely survived the vicious inferno they built for her, she had conquered it, claiming the sweetest freedom imaginable.